Okay, everyone. Well, it's really a pleasure for me to host Kevin Bass and Ethan Weiss today debating keto diet, the good, bad, and ugly. Is it really something good? Is it something bad? And we have also a guest star, Dr. Aaron Goodman, who is going to tell us his experience as he as he actually applied the keto diet on himself. But first of all, thank you all for joining the Healthcare Unfiltered podcast. I realize that this is not always easy to carve out time of a busy schedule. Also, we're taping this on a Sunday afternoon, and it will air sometime in mid-June 2021. Just to level set, I'd like to make some introductions, and then we'll start with basic questions, and then we'll try to explain to listeners and to viewers on YouTube what is that we're talking about and why there's some controversy. Kevin, let's start with you. Who are you?
I am, as you mentioned, I'm Kevin Bass. I'm an MD PhD student in Texas, and I've done the ketogenic diet a few times. Once, maybe 15 years ago, and then once recently about 3 years ago. And then I had like a brief period. I did it for like 2 weeks, like 2 weeks ago. I'm a researcher on the ketogenic diet. So I research both the receptors of ketones. So in particular, beta hydroxybutyrate, and it's a receptor known as GPR109A or HCAR2. And then I'm also interested in the whether or not ketones themselves through pathways other than through this receptor might have an impact on cancer. So both through the receptor and through other pathways might influence cancer carcinogenesis and cancer progression. And that's what my PhD is currently on. I'm in the last year of my PhD, and I will be continuing my third year of medical school in a year.
Excellent. Ethan, you have been my guest a couple of times. Appreciate you taking another time to come with us. But for those who have not listened to you before, who are you?
Great question. Is this rated G?
No. This is.
I can say whatever I want.
Remember, Ethan, this is Healthcare Unfiltered. We don't edit anything. We don't filter anything.
All right.
Absolutely say whatever you want.
All right. Well, I'm an academic physician scientist, a clinical cardiologist. I sort of have a niche of being interested in prevention, and have a research program that spans sort of from, animal physiology all the way through human interventional clinical trials on metabolism. Kind of simplest way to think about it. And I think a lot about ketones, and the lab is sort of doing a little bit of, I would say, toe wetting, not bedwetting, on trying to understand some of the physiology, which I think is really interesting and not well understood to my very naive view. And then I have been doing myself mostly a modified form. I like to call it a Mediterranean style ketogenic diet for almost 3.5 years. And I also, just as a way of disclosure, I'm a co-founder of a company that is basically trying to make it easy for people to do this kind of a thing if they want to lose weight.
Excellent. And Aaron, you're our guest. You're like the guinea pig who tried this, but it worked. So you're gonna participate in the conversation after we level set. But maybe really quickly, who are you?
Yes, as I speak, I can taste the ketones on my breath, and I'm loving it. I'm a bone marrow transplant physician, not a basic scientist, do clinical trials, and yes, as you said, I am currently on the ketogenic diet.
Excellent. All right. So the first question that I have is just a description. When we talk about ketogenic diet, what is it that we are saying? What are we telling listeners? What is a ketogenic diet, Kevin?
Well, according to some of the pioneers in the field, a ketogenic diet is a diet that causes blood ketones, in particular beta hydroxybutyrate. It's a particular one of the blood ketones to rise in the blood to a concentration of 0.5 millimolar, and that's considered by these individuals to be therapeutic ketosis. It's somewhat of an arbitrary cutoff. Under normal conditions, blood ketones, that is to say under fed conditions, under a Western diet or a higher carbohydrate diet, blood ketones are, say, between 0 and maybe 0.1 millimolar at most. So a ketogenic diet is whatever raises those blood ketones up to 0.5 millimolar. And that essentially consists of restricting carbohydrate and increasing fat to compensate for the reduction in carbohydrate. And this restriction in carbohydrate and increase in fat is what causes ketogenesis to occur in a nutshell, and to get those blood ketones up to that particular level.
Okay, so Ethan, this is what the ketogenic diet, when did it start becoming popular that this is a good diet, at least by some, to follow? And what's the goal of following a ketogenic diet? What is the person trying to accomplish?
Well, I mean, lots of people want to accomplish a lot of different things. I would say the evidence base is supporting the benefits that many people may ascribe to ketogenic diets is flimsy to non-existent, outside of a few kind of very specific areas that Kevin and I can talk about. But that doesn't mean that people don't think that it does a lot of other things, including like cure cancer or make you be able to walk on water.
Sure.
But I think the most common reason that people use it is for weight loss or improvement of, I hate this term, but improvement of metabolic health, really to improve your glycemia. And you know how we measure that typically with fasting glucose, hemoglobin A1C, fasting insulin, things like that. And I would say that it was, so as far as I know, the first descriptions of using this kind of a diet were published in the late 1700s. Wouldn't say that it was popular back then, but there were definitely some case reports. And then many other just sort of case reports throughout the 19th century. There was an Italian doctor who I believe his last name was Cantani or something like that. And he wrote a bunch of books about this. And it kind of went away around, 1920, 21 when insulin was discovered, because, and at that time, I should say, people were using it to treat diabetes. And which was really the only way you could only treat diabetes with lifestyle. There were no medicines, or no good medicines other than like arsenic. But then in that same time, remarkably, people started using this diet to treat epilepsy. And that was the only, I think, real use of this diet from, I would say, 1920 until 1970s. And then, Robert Atkins made this popular again, starting really in the 1980s.
But and he brought it back with the idea that if you do this diet, you are going to lose weight.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can walk into any bookstore in the fucking world and you can see a diet that's going to help you lose weight. There are 10 million diets that will help you lose weight. I think, this one, he was dynamic. He was a cardiologist and he was a good salesman. And I don't know if they had any data, Kevin. I don't know if you know, but I haven't seen any published studies that Atkins himself did, other than like maybe some case reports. But I don't think there was like an RCT.
I don't think so back then. Yeah.
So Kevin, you're aligned here that the goal of this diet, as it came in by Dr. Atkins when he started popularizing it, was for people to lose weight, and it was also looking at the cholesterol, lowering lipids. Like what I mean, it's just, this is, you lose weight and you look sexy on the beach. That was the goal.
Yeah, I don't know Atkins's precise claims, and I don't know if he was. That's a whole very interesting discussion. What was his discussion around cholesterol? How far does that discussion around cholesterol go back? Because we're almost certainly going to end up talking about that here. I'm not sure about that. I do know that this is my understanding of the published literature, that the relationship between obesity and hyperlipidemia, so the level of blood cholesterol, is actually somewhat weak. And then often whenever you do go on a ketogenic diet, your blood cholesterol will often rise, especially if it's an animal-based ketogenic diet. Again, we're going to jump into that more. But yeah, from what I understand, the hardcore carbohydrate restricted diet was sort of an induction phase. In fact, contrary to even what a lot of later ketogenic diet advocates or a lot of later low carb advocates say, after you lose that weight on the Atkins diet, this is just sort of a historical footnote, but after you lose that weight on the Atkins diet, he actually recommended, yeah, you could include whole grains, you could include lots of other things, whereas things have gotten a little bit more extreme in some parts of the keto and low carb world. But yeah, that was, I think, the original idea, is that you could lose weight on this low carb diet that Atkins would prescribe. I don't know if he had any other applications.
Okay.
I think it was mostly weight loss, but you know, when he died, and that story is kind of fascinating because everyone, if you ask like 100 people on the street who have heard of him before, how he died, they'll all say he died of a heart attack. But apparently he didn't die of a heart attack. He like slipped on the ice and hit his head. But the story was that he died of a heart attack. So of course that didn't look great. Here's this cardiologist who died of a heart attack.
I actually thought he died of a heart attack.
Yeah, he didn't. But anyway, the diet kind of died in popularity with his death. And then it was kind of reborn. I think there was this big thing. Somebody was telling me yesterday that there was it blew up on Reddit like 2013. But Kevin, you would probably be able to say more because you did it a long time ago.
Yeah. So yeah. Where did that come? So I first did the ketogenic diet in like 2004.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite a while ago, and that was through a guy named Lyle McDonald. And this was during a period of time in the early 2000s. This was even, I think, even before Talb's, who's sort of one of the major keto low carb proponents now. This is even before Talb's, and I don't know where this came from, but I know that Lyle was very interested in it from a biochemical point of view. He did his bachelor's degree in biochemistry at Berkeley. He's a very smart guy, somewhat controversial in the sort of diet and the fitness field. But he was interested in that point of view, and he's interested in particular with respect to muscle retention whenever dieting, and also helps to maybe suppress appetite. And there's also a really big guy, a giant in the health and fitness field. He's probably one of the biggest guys, if not the biggest guy in the early 2000s. His name named Charles Poliquin, and he was really big into low carb diets as well. And this is, I think, also before Talb's. And so I'm not sure exactly where they were inheriting that from. But yeah, that's it's been on and off. It's been on and off ever since, I think you were mentioning the 1700s. It's been since Rollo, but then it's been on and off. Like Briette Savarin. There's been advocates throughout, especially even Osler was interested, and as you know, Ethan, he was interested in using it to treat diabetes, and it's been off and on repeatedly throughout ever since the 1700s, 1800s. So I don't know what the lineage was to me in 2004, but it's been around, and it comes in waves.
Sure.
That's my understanding.
Aaron, just a quick question. When you decided to do it, what was your goal? Like, what did you decide? Why did you decide to do the ketogenic diet?
I was getting fat. Just wanted to lose some weight fast.
Right. So your main goal, like, I'm gaining weight. I want to lose weight, and this was the fastest way to do it.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to, let's say, I want to go on ketogenic diet. What am I supposed to do, Ethan? What do I start doing? Is there a guide? I mean, I heard from Kevin, I lower the carbs, I increase the fat. What does that mean? No bread, no pasta, but get, I don't know, cheese, and I don't know, like, what, can you give us some examples of what you eliminate and what you add to your diet?
Well, yeah. Do you want to discuss the sort of conventional modern ketogenic diet?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's important to emphasize that this is actually, to me, a really interesting question, and I don't know if there's a way to answer it. But since nutrition is really zero sum, right? If you think about the macronutrients, the three macronutrients, you can't just, if you're gonna eat the same number of calories a day, let's say you eat 1,000 calories a day, and let's say you eat 30% of your calories from protein. So at least 70% of your calories to come from fat and from carbohydrate. There's no way to reduce carbohydrates without either increasing protein or fat. And I think there are some people, and this is controversial, but I think so protein is a substrate for gluconeogenesis. And I think there are people out there who think that protein at higher levels can inhibit ketogenesis. And so traditionally, when people do this, what they do basically is swap carbohydrate calories for fat calories. It's basically a 1-for-1 swap. So in a normal, typical American diet, you're having 50 or 60% of your calories from carbohydrates. Like I said, 30% from protein, 20 to 30% from protein, and then the rest from fat. And this is a swap. So now you're having 60, 70% of calories from fat and much lower 10% carbohydrate, or even lower, depending on who you talk to, and keeping protein about the same. I mean, that's the way that I think about it.
You agree with that, Kevin?
Well, so what usually often happens in the typical low carb diet is whenever you're switching fat for carbs, say you're going to take out your grains, your rice, your bread, etc., and sugar, cokes, sodas, whatever, and then often what people do is they start eating more meat, fatty meat. So yes, there is a switch from carbohydrates to fats, but because of the foods that contain the fats, they often tend to be a little bit higher protein. Practically speaking, in the real world, especially if you look at a lot of ad libitum studies, like people giving dietary advice and then reporting what they actually end up eating, often in these sorts of studies, they do tend to be a little bit higher protein, because often these higher fat foods that are replacing the higher carb foods tend to also be higher in protein, even though it's not necessary, or even maybe, as Ethan was pointing out, maybe even good for ketone levels to have higher protein. Often in practice, they often tend to be a little bit higher protein diets as well. But it depends on the guru that you're listening to. But I would say in general, in practice, since they're higher meat, they're higher animal food diets, they tend to be a little bit higher in protein.
You make a great point, which is that we talk about these things as like math experiments, and there aren't a lot of people out there with metabolic kitchens in their home who are like formulating their diets. And so really what you're eating is not macros, you're eating foods. And so I think, yeah, that's a really important point.
Ethan, when Kevin started the conversation, he was mentioning that you have to measure you have to measure the ketones in the blood, and he gave us an arbitrary point of a concentration. So are folks who are following the ketogenic diet measuring this? I mean, do they check the measurements? And I'm going to ask Aaron if he measured it himself. But I mean, if that's what the definition of it, how often are people in fact measuring the ketones in the blood?
Well, I don't think we have any idea. I mean, I think that there was sort of a modern, I don't know what happened in the Atkins era. In fact, I seriously doubt, Kevin, you probably know this, but I don't think anyone was measuring ketones back then.
I don't think so. Yeah.
I think, in the past, 10 years since keto became popular again, people have been measuring mostly, I would say, through urine. And then some people, the biohackers, are measuring it through blood. And then there's this, recent development of being able to measure it through breath. Okay. Yeah. So
Aaron, when you followed the ketogenic diet, were you actually measuring the concentrations, whether urine, breath, blood? Were you doing that?
Yeah, I went to the Walgreens, the diabetes aisle, and you can get these strips you pee on. And, at the start, I was doing it more because, I will admit, it's kind of rewarding when you see it turn purple. Although again, it would be different shades of purple, but for the most part, whenever I pee on one of those things, it's purple. And as I've progressed in the diet, I've gotten less diligent in checking it, but I occasionally check it just out of curiosity. I also use it like how much I can do without losing ketosis. I had a beer the other day, and that wasn't enough to do it, so I use it for that reason too. Again, I've never looked up the accuracy or, the validity of these things, but I have been using them.
But conceptually, if somebody is listening and they want to follow the ketogenic diet, I mean, if you want to really go by the book, essentially they have to get themselves into a ketosis, like they have to elevate the level of ketones, right? I mean,
I think it's, the way I think about this is sort of how, and I don't want to spend any more time talking about this company because I don't want to feel like need to take a shower again. But I think one of the things about this diet that's different about every other diet is that it affords people to be able to follow a biomarker that they otherwise don't have. Like there are no other diets where you can follow a biomarker to see if you're doing it right. So, well, the only biomarker you have is stepping on the scale, and we all know how that changes relatively slowly, and it'll go up and down, and you don't really know why. Water weight and all the other things. So this diet is unique in that you can follow a biomarker and it can tell you how you're doing. And I think that's, to me at least, an important advantage from a behavioral standpoint, because like Aaron said, it made him feel good. Like it made him feel like he was doing something right. And I do think if you step back and start asking questions about why people, so almost anybody can lose weight on almost any diet in the short term. The place we all fall apart is being able to maintain it. And so if you start to ask questions about why people don't maintain their diets, I think one of the things that's really interesting that I would, if I were to go on to like have a second phase of my academic career, I'd really want to understand this. I think there are behavioral components to feeling successful and feeling good about yourself that really significantly impact this.
Okay. I think we know enough about the ketogenic diet. I want to get into why there's controversy. Like, I mean, obviously, Kevin, you have some issues against it. I'm not talking in a very, strong way. Maybe you'll have to tell me. And Ethan obviously is pro it. Where's the controversy, and what do you both disagree on, Kevin?
Very little.
I don't know if we disagree, and that's we probably have to manufacture reasons to disagree, which I'm happy to do if you want us to try to do that. But as far as like what the issue with the ketogenic diet, well, essentially it's sort of there's actually maybe a lot here, or there's a substantial amount here. So as I was mentioning, the typical dietary pattern that people often follow whenever they go on a ketogenic or a low carb diet is a diet that's higher in animal products and lower in, well, it's often junky carbs. So it's often like processed foods like pastries, donuts, cookies, candy, sodas, etc. And then it's higher in animal products. Well, certainly there's a lot of bad parts to consuming a lot of processed food, and there's epidemiological studies that we know of that show a dose-response relationship between the processed food consumption and mortality, et cetera, et cetera. We know those foods aren't the greatest for you, for sure. But then whenever you replace them by animal foods, by in particular foods that are high in saturated fat, and I think that's probably one of the key points of discussion, and perhaps even dietary cholesterol, depending upon if you're a hyper responder. But then you can often get elevations in LDL cholesterol levels. And we know from the epidemiological literature that higher animal product consumption is associated with higher mortality, and perhaps through this particular pathway, and perhaps through some other pathways as well. We don't know exactly. But certainly that we know that elevations in blood cholesterol levels, in particular LDL cholesterol, is associated with and causal for cardiovascular disease, and perhaps even cancer as well, because cancer takes up cholesterol. So that is the controversy in a nutshell. How many animal products people are going to be consuming or increasing their consumption of whenever they start a ketogenic diet, and whether or not that's healthful. So even though you might get an improvement.
So Kevin, you're saying if you follow the ketogenic diet, the LDL might go up?
Yes, the sort of the popular version of the ketogenic diet that's often promoted by most of the proponents of the ketogenic diet has a tendency to cause the LDL cholesterol level to go up. Yes.
Okay. So Ethan, we do the ketogenic diet, it might cause the LDL to go up, and I'm not a cardiologist, but I thought that's a bad thing, no?
Yeah, it's terrible.
So why would I follow a diet that makes my LDL go? Do I take a statin after that? Do I follow the ketogenic diet, go the LDL, take a statin?
Well, here's the controversy, I think, and this is why Kevin and I probably agree 99 times out of 100 and don't really disagree about anything. Because a sane, rational person would say, well, gosh, I don't want my LDL to be high. Like, there's a lot of lines of evidence that suggest that that's bad for you, for all kinds of things, like having strokes, heart attacks, and dying. And I think, again, it's not just like one experiment, right? I mean, this is multiple lines of evidence across multiple different fields, right? Experimental biology, all the way up through randomized trials, genetics, the whole deal. So I think we can all agree, like, higher LDL is bad. Like, a sane, rational person who's grown up in the modern medical world understands that high LDL is bad. Well, I think part of what happened was there was a crew of people out there who discovered the ketogenic diet and had tremendous success with it. And, it was somewhat counter to the advice that they were given by their doctors, right? I mean, I grew up, my dad's a cardiologist, and I grew up in an era where eating fat, any fat was bad, and like everything was low fat, including Skittles. And so like we would have like a ton of Skittles at home and as much Coke or whatever as we wanted, because carbohydrates aren't fat. And so eating fat was something we were all conditioned not to do. And it was assumed, I think incorrectly, that all fat is bad, not just some kinds of fat, particularly saturated fat. So I think these people saw that they had discovered this magic where they lost all this weight, all of these other parameters that they could measure improved, including like a lot of these people have diabetes and they would be coming off of diabetes medications, which is remarkable and meaningful and important. And, you know, other markers would get better. But then there was this one bright, shiny zit, which was, of all the things you could look at, there was this one thing that went the wrong direction. That was LDL cholesterol. So my understanding, you know, again, I'm not an anthropologist, but my understanding of what happened was that these people, again, superstitious and suspicious because everything they've been told was just violated. They didn't have any confidence in their doctors or even in conventional modern American medicine. And they then decided, you know what, this same thing must be, this LDL thing must be wrong too. And so I think what's gone on in some corners of low carb keto world is that people have set out not just to ask the question, which I think is a reasonable question, which is, in this context where you've lost weight and your metabolic health has improved, does an increase in LDL cholesterol mean the same thing as it would in other contexts? I think that's an important question that's unanswered. But to me, the default answer to that is, until we show otherwise, it does. These people have taken the other stance, which is, not only are we just going to assume that question, the answer to that question is it is actually not harmful in this context, we're going to destroy the lipid hypothesis in general, right? It's not even that good enough to say LDL cholesterol is bad in the context of ketogenic diets. They're going to go one step further, which is to say LDL cholesterol doesn't cause heart attacks, period, full stop.
Aaron, did you check your LDL? You're our guinea pig experiment. Did you check your LDL?
No, I'm kind of scared now to do so. I knew it was
fix
high
it
before, and I would probably should have been. I don't know though. I don't keep up with my cardiology that much. Probably needed a statin, but I was like, I'm going to give myself the 3-month diet, and it's been 3 months now. I have lost a lot of weight.
Well, what was your LDL before? Do you know?
It was like upper hundreds. I mean, it needed to be down. I think, right? You know, I don't have any other cardiovascular risk factors that I know of. I'm not hypertensive, but it was like 190s. I mean, it was high. So.
And Aaron, are you following like a conventional keto diet? Are you eating like a lot of bacon and steak and butter and stuff like that, or what are you eating?
No, so I looked it up at first. I educated myself, but you know, when I started, I don't measure. I'm not going to be measuring. I don't measure anything, but I basically replaced, most of my meals were pastas, pizzas, breads, and I just got rid of all that stuff. So actually my vegetable intake might even have gone up. I eat a lot of Brussels sprouts, cabbage, broccoli, and I eat meat. I'll eat bacon, but like, you know, I do a lot of chicken Caesar salads. So like, I'm not like adding tons of butter to everything, but I don't think twice when I add butter to something like maybe I used to have. So
how much weight did you lose in the 3 months?
Over 30 pounds.
Is that to be expected, Ethan? I mean, 30 pounds in 3 months, that seems to me unhealthy as a
I feel great.
No.
It was all central. I mean, I was getting a gut.
Wait until you get your LDL about 400, then we'll see.
Then they'll statin. Don't they have like antibodies and all these things now that can lower my?
Yeah.
Science will fix me.
I'm trying to understand. So it's intriguing what Ethan said, Kevin. I'd like you to comment that. I mean, is there research to say that the rising LDL from a ketogenic diet has no cardiovascular risk factors? Is that even possible?
Yeah, so I think that when we look at the epidemiology of risk factors for cardiovascular disease, in particular the Enterhart study, we see that, and also Framingham, and actually if you look at any risk calculator for cardiovascular disease, they're all very similar with respect to this. Each risk factor is not additional to each other risk factor, but they're in fact, they multiply, they're synergistic with each other. So if you have, say, diabetes plus high LDL plus hypertension, it's not like, oh, the diabetes causes a threefold increase, the hypertension causes a threefold increase, the LDL causes threefold. No, it's more like, it's not like, so it's not ninefold increase if you add them all together. It's more like 3 times 3 times 3, like whatever, that would be like 70 or 80 something fold. It's like, that's the way that cardiovascular risk works. So there's something plausible. And in fact, if you look at the risk calculators for cardiovascular disease, there's something plausible. And this is actually funny. I'm actually taking the kind of a more liberal perspective than Ethan, I guess, or maybe he would agree. I'm not sure. But
no, I think it's plausible. I know what you're going to say. It's plausible.
If you look at these, if you look at if you just raise LDL in these risk calculators, the risk, goes up from like, 0.5% to like 1.5%. It's not a gigantic thing. It's only whenever you add these other risk factors that whenever you see like a big jump in LDL that you have a huge jump in risk. But that doesn't mean that it's good to have a 1% increase in risk, but it's still a less of an increase if it's an isolated.
Things may have changed since the last time I took internal medicine boards, although I did recertify last year, so I'm still going. But basically,
you did?
Yeah, I did. I know. I couldn't let go. I'm like that. I know, it's crazy. But what I don't understand. Let me back up a little bit. If you have no cardiovascular risk factors, like Aaron has no cardiovascular risk factors, an LDL over 130 is inappropriate. So you should bring it below 130 or maybe 160. You guys would know more than I do, but I thought it was, if you have no cardiovascular risk factors, should be below 130. If you have cardiovascular risk factors, was either below 100 or now you want below 70, like the lower the better, obviously. So if I'm going to follow the ketogenic diet without any cardiovascular risk factors and my LDL goes 200, is there a way to bring it down without going on a statin?
Okay, hold on, wait. But before we answer that question, this is really important. A lot of people who do this diet, so 190 is an arbitrary cutoff that the people who do these things identified as a place where you would say, you know what, that alone is enough to sort of stimulate a discussion, or should stimulate a conversation around taking statins. Because a lot of people above 190 have familial hypercholesterolemia, have heterozygous familial hypercholesterolemia. And we know that that's bad. So 190 is sort of a different kettle of fish than say 160. But some of the people doing this diet are not seeing 190 or 160, they're seeing 400 or 600. I've had a few patients come to see me who have LDL cholesterols of, in that range, 600 to 700. Now, I think Kevin made a great point, which is there's this question of context, right? So if your health improves in domain A, B, and C, and it gets worse in E or D, what does that look like? And we don't know the answer to that question, right? So in other words, if you lose weight, your fasting glucose, your A1C comes down, your CRP comes down, but your LDL goes up. What does that mean? We don't know. But then there's this other question, which is the change or increase in LDL cholesterol due to low carbohydrate diets, is it somehow less dangerous because of something having to do with the lipoproteins? In other words, are the lipoproteins less harmful in the context of a ketogenic diet? And that is a question that absolutely has not been answered, but needs to be.
But Ethan, for this person who comes to you and you see an LDL of 400, and Aaron, I'm afraid, Aaron is a young guy. He's going to have a heart attack when he gets a 400, when he checks his LDL. Nice guy, but what's going to happen to him? But what do you tell these folks? Do you say, I presume you can't tell them to ignore it, right?
No, I don't tell them to ignore it. I tell them that there is a plausible possibility that I'll be wrong, but that's life, right? We don't have evidence. I can't. But I'd say when I look at the sort of preponderance of all of the evidence, I think that because there are at least 2 or 3 different levers you can pull to fix this problem, that I would personally choose to fix it and not ignore it, not hope that there's not a time bomb sitting in my body that's going to explode in 10 years.
And you would
Like,
fix it with a statin?
no, not necessarily. I mean, I think that's one possibility.
Okay.
But I think what Kevin and I have sort of where we agree is that you can actually do a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet where you make ketones and you get all the benefits of these diets, but you do so without adding all this extra saturated fat, and instead add an abundance of mono and polyunsaturated fats. And that has been shown again and again to actually have very little effect on ApoB or these, sort of bad lipoproteins. And so I think there are both lifestyle ways to do this, and there are stats. So I tell people that come to me, and it's a self-selected group of people, right? If they're coming to a cardiologist who has sort of a presence and understanding, a public-facing position of not believing that LDL is something to be ignored, then they're self-selected. But when they come to see me, I say, look, you have 3 options, or you really have 4 options. One is you can ignore LDL and just hope that it doesn't cause any problem. You can do that. I'm not going to tell you you're an idiot, but I will tell you I won't do that. 2 is you can stop doing the diet. No one likes that idea. 3 is you can change your diet and, again, reduce the amount of saturated fat, increase and replace with a lot more mono and polyunsaturated fats. And then the last option is you can take a medicine. And it's not just statins. You could theoretically take ezetimibe, or you could take a PCSK9 inhibitor in the right context. But there are multiple ways to mitigate this. So from my perspective, why do you sit around on the hope that this bomb has been diffused, right? Like, you got a bomb sitting in your basement. I'm in my basement. There's a bomb sitting there. Am I just going to like cross my fingers and hope it's been diffused? Or am I going to actually get the right people in here to take care of it?
Okay. Very, very good analogy. And thanks for clarifying the cholesterol. Aaron, keep us posted when you get your LDL checked.
Yes, one quick question. What foods have those fats in it that you were talking about? The good
saturated fat?
Yeah. Not the saturated. You said some long type of fat that I missed out that is okay to eat.
Yeah, so basically it's so it's really fatty acid. So each triglyceride molecule has 3 fatty acids on it, and the ones that are solid at room temperature are generally have a lot of saturated fatty acids. So butter and lard. We can come back to cheese, because cheese is kind of a funny thing in and of itself. But anything where if you put a meal and leave it at room temperature, if it solidifies, it's got a lot of saturated fat.
Okay.
That's what I'm talking about, getting rid of that. And then replacing it with things that are liquid at room temperature, and even predominantly liquid in the refrigerator. So, the fats that you get in like olive oil or nuts or salmon, avocado.
Kevin, you went on the diet several times.
Yeah.
And you came off it several times. I just want to try to understand. I realize you and Ethan probably agree holistically on some of the scientific facts. I can totally sense that, because, there are certain factual things that you just can't disagree on. But fundamentally, you disagree in how you've approached this diet. Ethan follows the diet and you don't. So I guess I want to get into why don't you follow the diet and why Ethan follows the diet. Why don't you tell us why you don't follow the diet, Kevin?
Well, for me, it works well. It's nice. I don't see that. I guess there's 2 reasons. I don't see that the diet is advantageous for me above eating a higher carbohydrate diet in terms of body composition. So I might, I think, because the ketogenic diet, as Ethan was pointing out, produces a biomarker, ketones in particular, that shows your adherence. And because in order to achieve elevations in that biomarker, you must be quite adherent to the ketogenic diet, there is an advantage in the ketogenic diet in that it sort of rewards adherence and discourages cheating. So if I'm on a higher carbohydrate diet and I'm eating a bunch of lentils, or it's a low-fat diet of whole foods, I'm going to be less inclined to, I'm going to be more inclined to cheat. Because if I cheat, I'm just going to have a donut or whatever, but it's not going to violate this biomarker that I'm trying to achieve. So there is that advantage to it. And I do actually see maybe a little bit slightly lower body fat percentage. I believe I attribute it to that aspect of tight adherence from the ketogenic diet. So I do see maybe like a few pounds, 5 pounds less fat. I care about 5 pounds less fat on the ketogenic diet. However, it's not a big difference. It's not a really noticeable difference. And the downside for me is that if I say stay on it for like 3 months, I tend to start feeling lazy, like kind of down. I don't feel as much energy as I would feel whenever I'm eating a lot of carbohydrate. I don't know the reason for that. There are some mechanisms that people have suggested. It does slightly depress thyroid hormone on a statistically significant basis. There's other mechanisms, but I don't quite feel as much energy on the long term on a ketogenic diet after a few months as I would on a higher carbohydrate diet. So it doesn't work for me as well mentally as it does for a lot of other people.
Ethan, why do you keep following it? I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I was muted.
Yep.
For the exact opposite reason, because it works for me. I feel great. I mean, and I guess it's really important to say the obvious, which is that there's no one diet that works for everybody. And lots of people have different experiences. I was never a dieter. Like, I found this diet by accident, and you know, it worked really well. I mean, not beyond just losing weight. And again, it's impossible to tell how much of this is like the change in my life is due to the fact that I don't carry around an extra 25 pounds of fat. Like, I had to buy all new pants for the first time since I was like, it was the first time that I went that direction, right? Normally in life, you're getting bigger pants, but then I actually got smaller pants. So that was, and I feel good, and I've continued to, you know, I've weighed the same exact weight for the past 3 years, basically.
Aaron, aside from the fact that you're resurrecting your modeling career with losing 30 pounds, do you feel better mentally, physically? Like, what impact did the diet have on you as somebody who did it?
I feel better. Again, how much is that just due to because I lost the weight and that's a mental thing? I mean, for the last 3 to 4 years, I was working out, running, and like nothing changed. You know, I just was someone who never could change their diet. I like eating burritos, pizza, and I didn't want to do that. And then after 3 to 4 years, I was like, you know, I want to get back to my weight as a med student. And I made the change, and I did. It's all fat. I mean, I won't get too graphic with you guys, but like, I can see that it's fat on my body that's going away. None of my clothes fit also. You know, things that were tight with the belt, now they're loose. Even the scrubs that I wear on rounding are looser. So that part was very rewarding for me, especially because it happened so fast, and, you know, people noticed. So, and I do feel better, whether there's this mental clarity or not, I don't know. I mean, I'm fine. I can also go, you know, I can also go quite a bit of time without eating. You know, I have not been as hungry as I used to be. Sometimes I skip lunch or have something very small. And I was someone where when I eat, I get tired afterwards. But that stopped happening, at least on this diet for me. So how much of that's real or in my head, I don't know. But I definitely feel better.
So, and I mean, what questions you think we need to clarify for listeners, really? I mean, you're the two experts that I know who really understand the diet, whether scientifically as well as the impact on people. Again, my goal of this is really to bring both sides. I mean, for somebody who is listening, who is considering to do this diet, Ethan, what would you tell him? And Kevin, what would you tell him or her? So if I'm considering this and I'm coming to say, hey, doc, I'm thinking about doing the ketogenic diet, Dr. Weiss, what would you tell me?
Well, first I would ask you why.
I wanna be healthier.
Right. Well, I can't tell you that this diet's going to make you healthier. I mean, I guess I can tell you that if you're overweight and you lose weight, you're going to be healthier. But I think we have to be very careful about making claims that are not supported by data. I mean, look, we have an abundance of data, most of it not very good, but there is an abundance of data now on these diets looking at two major outcomes, one being weight and the other being sort of diabetes parameters. Everything else is magic. I mean, everything else is like made up. It doesn't mean that there won't be a benefit for this diet for something like Alzheimer's disease or something else, but there's no evidence, zero evidence that it is now. And so I think if your goal is to lose some weight and therefore be healthier, then I think assuming with the one caveat that we already discussed, assuming your cholesterol doesn't go haywire, I think it's perfectly reasonable to try it.
Kevin, what would you tell me if I came to you and told you that?
I would say the same thing as Ethan. The evidence isn't there for a lot of other parameters besides weight loss and, glycemia, average glycemia, postprandial glycemia. And I think in that respect, it's really good. But, and a lot of things are completely made up and overhyped. And there's a lot of negative trials out there for a lot of other parameters that I think people don't pay enough close attention to and overhype it. So don't, as Ethan says, don't expect for it to treat your Alzheimer's. I don't think there's good data for that kind of thing. I would say that if your LDL does go up, his recommendations are good. There's also one other thing that you could possibly do. I've seen and I've heard of a lot of people reporting good results from this, and there's a decent evidence base for this. Is you can also just supplement with fiber. You can supplement with something like Metamucil, and that can actually have a big impact on lowering your LDL cholesterol if you want to continue eating a predominantly meat-based ketogenic diet. But if you're thinking to really maximize the health benefit of a ketogenic diet, switching from more of a meat-based, more of a plant-based ketogenic diet, that is to say more olive oils, avocado, nuts, seeds, and fish, as opposed to, say, the whole red meat, bacon sort of approach to the ketogenic diet. I think that would be my suggestion for people who are interested in trying the ketogenic diet.
I'm really glad you brought up fiber, because I do think that's one of the sort of confounding variables that, in addition to saturated fat, that probably has a big impact on lipids.
Yes.
In the last few minutes, I just want to do something fun, like a little more practical thing. So I want to go through, Ethan, a day in the life of Dr. Ethan Weiss in terms of breakfast, lunch.
Haven't we done this already?
We did this on Clubhouse, but this is different listeners. But in all seriousness,
yeah.
I do think, I think in my mind, I'm trying to think how difficult that is. I'm looking at the practical thing, because the reality is sometimes, if you have a busy schedule, and obviously you have a busy schedule, and a lot of people are busy, and you have like 15 minutes for lunch. Like it's not always feasible if it's so picky to decide on your diet. So I want to try to let listeners know, what does breakfast look like, how difficult it is.
Okay.
Dinner.
I'll tell you what I eat, but I'm going to tell you that I think that one misconception, there are a lot of misconceptions about low carb diets, both the good way and the bad way. We've talked about some of the misconceptions that people have that I think are bad. There are some that I think are the other way around. Like, I think people think that it's a lot harder than it actually is. It's not that hard. It's actually, and I think one of the things that you end up doing, the hardest part of it is that I find myself preparing a lot more of the food that I put in my mouth than I used to before, because you can't just go to the cafeteria and easily, without just like getting a hamburger and taking the bun off, it's really hard. It is harder to find food that kind of fits this model. So I do make almost all the meals that I eat, or when I go out. I mean, I'm more careful. So you want to know what I eat?
Yep.
So for breakfast, I have this plant-based yogurt, this almond-based yogurt. It's like one of these like bullshit artisanal brands, but it's actually really good. It's made by a company called Kite Hill, and I have no ownership or stock in the company, but it's relatively low carbohydrate. There's no sugar added to it. And I throw in like a handful of berries, a handful of walnuts, and a handful of seeds, or like whatever nut I have in the house, or whatever berries I have in the house. And I eat that.
Is having eggs for breakfast okay?
I think mostly yes. Like, I don't recommend people have 30 eggs a day. And again, it really depends on whether or not you are one of these people whose cholesterol goes up. So if somebody comes to me, and I have a lot of patients who do, because their cholesterol went up on one of these diets, we'll pull a few levers. Like, one thing we'll do is reduce saturated fat, replace that with unsaturated fat. And the other thing we'll do is kind of reduce dietary cholesterol. The dogma has been that the impact of dietary cholesterol on circulating levels of blood cholesterol is relatively modest. But there are certain people, like Kevin alluded to before, who are hyperabsorbers, and it's hard to know that. It's hard to know that except figuring it out empirically. So I think I certainly eat eggs. I'm going to have eggs tonight. Actually, I'm going to make a frittata for dinner for my family, but I don't eat a ton of eggs. I'll have like 2 to 3 eggs a week kind of thing. But I think eating a few eggs is fine.
Okay. Lunch?
I have a salad. I make myself a salad every day. And the salad is kind of the same thing. I'll throw in usually a can of salmon, I use salmon as opposed to other fish because it's got less mercury. And this is like, safe, whatever, ocean, not like harming wildlife, right? We all have to make choices. And then I salt and pepper, and then a bunch of vegetables. I chop up a bunch of vegetables. I throw in some nuts, and some lettuce, like arugula or something. And then I toss it with olive oil and salt and pepper, and that's my lunch.
And dinner.
And my kids make fun of me because I eat the same lunch almost every day.
Yeah, maybe listeners will do that too. Dinner.
Yeah, roasted vegetables and a protein, and the protein is usually fish, shrimp. I'll occasionally eat chicken. Very occasionally, a few times a month, I'll eat lamb or pork. I don't eat beef, but very occasionally I'll eat something else. But that's kind of it. It's usually some roasted vegetable and a protein.
Kevin, am I allowed to have pizza, French fries with the keto diet?
If you like.
That's a tough one. Yeah.
You're allowed to do it. But wait, Aaron's actually, and this is something I think that's worth studying in the future, because Aaron had the same observation that I had, which is as I got used to this thing, I could tolerate a lot more carbs. It kind of goes back to what Kevin was saying about how Atkins had this staged approach to his diet where you would be very restricted in the beginning and then you'd sort of increase your carbohydrate intake over time. And I found, I don't really check my ketone levels anymore, but I can kind of tell just based on how I feel or like what happens on the scale. I can tolerate, like I'll have a beer and it's no big deal, or I'll actually go out and have sushi. Like I'll have sushi a few times a month and it's not, and with like rice, and nothing happens. Like,
okay. My last question is alcohol.
Yes.
Kevin.
Well, alcohol will knock you out of ketosis, and it does contain calories that if you drink a lot, it will without reducing your other sources of calories, then you're going to gain weight with alcohol. So that was what I would say for alcohol.
Okay. Well, look, this was a lot of fun.
I disagree with that. We finally actually have something we disagree on.
Okay, good.
Finally.
There are carbohydrates in many forms of alcohol, particularly like anything sweet. Obviously, a cocktail that has sugar, obviously, simple syrup, anything like that. Beer has a lot of carbohydrates, not low carbohydrate beers. Wine has like 4 to 5 grams per glass. But there's no carbohydrate. There's zero carbohydrate spirits. So if you want to have a vodka soda, yes, it has calories, and if you drank a shitload of vodka sodas, you'll get fat, but it won't knock you out of ketosis, or at least it didn't knock me out of ketosis.
That's interesting. That's interesting. My understanding of the literature, although, okay, so maybe it didn't knock you out of ketosis because you didn't drink that much, but my understanding is it's just as anti-ketogenic as like carbs are. I'm not sure though.
I haven't seen that at all. I think there's it would be interesting to look at that. Maybe we should ask Peter Crawford, but my understanding is, and empirically and anecdotally from my experience and experience of friends, you can,
drink it, yeah.
And when I was measuring my ketones a lot, I could go out. I was never like a major drinker, but like I could go out and have 3 or 4 cocktails and be fully in ketosis the next day.
I've experimented with whiskey, and it doesn't seem to knock me out.
Okay.
A reasonable amount. I won't.
Well,
Right.
I think hopefully, look, this was very helpful. The goal of this podcast is to bring a little bit more light into what the ketogenic diet meant. It's a very hot topic. I could tell you I had a lot of requests from colleagues and friends that they really wanted to know more, especially after the Clubhouse I did with Ethan. And hopefully this highlighted some of the controversies and what the goals are. Is there anything I should have asked that I did not ask before I let you guys go back to your beautiful Sunday? All right, that's good. Ethan, thank you so much. Kevin, thank you so much. And Aaron, thank you for being the guest on this show as our, the person who tried the ketogenic diet. I really appreciate you all taking time of your schedule. And until next time, guys, thank you so much.
Thanks, Shadi.
Thank you.